All right, today's lesson is on factoring, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to learn to factor out the greatest common factor. So as we look at factoring, the one thing I want you to know is that factoring is the opposite of multiplying. Factoring is dividing. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to think about dividing out the greatest common factor. Now, if you want to take notes at the top of your sheet, the one thing that you're going to see is you're going to put the GCF out front, and then you're going to have one set of parentheses. Okay? Now, when you do this, I've kind of started using this little ds, and it's not really anything you'll find in a textbook. It's just my way of trying to help you know what to do when you come across these GCF problems. So I want you to think about dividing big numbers. Notice that I put the D as a big D. So we're going to divide the bigs, and we're going to subtract the smalls. So what I mean is we're going to subtract the small exponents, which follows our exponent rules, that if you have a top and a bottom exponent, you subtract them. So we're going to divide the bigs and subtract the smalls. Jumping into number 1. If I look at 6x and 30 and I ask myself what number goes into 6x, it also goes into 30, the answer is 6. So I'm going to put that out here, and I'm going to have one set of parentheses. And I need to realize that if I have two things in parentheses with a plus sign in the middle, I'm going to end up with two things in parentheses with a plus sign in the middle. All right, so what I need to do is I need to imagine taking 6x and dividing out the 6, and taking 30 and dividing out the 6. So when I take 6x and divide out the 6's cancel, and all's left is an x. When I take 30 and divide out the 6 goes into 30 5 times, so there's nothing but a 5 there. You can always double check to see if your answer is correct by simply multiplying across the top of the parentheses and using your distributive formula. So 6 times x would give me 6x, and 6 times 5 would give me 30, and so that's kind of like a way to check your answer. All right, number 2. If I look at 8x, 16, and 24, first of all, look at the numbers. 8 will go into 8, 16, and 24, and that would be the greatest number that I could divide out of all three numbers. They also have an x in common, so the greatest number of x's they have in common is actually just 1. They all don't have 2, and they all don't have 3, so they all have at least one x. So it's basically like I'm going to take 8x and divide out 8x, take 16x squared and divide out 8x, take 24x to the third and divide out 8x. So I'm dividing out of each term. And so that's where ds for the first time will actually come into play. 8 goes into 8 one time. X cancels out x to the first. If you subtract exponents, you get x to the 0. But x to the 0, anything to the 0 power is 1, and so I don't have to show the x to the 0. Plus, 8 goes into 16 two times. X squared cancels out 1 and leaves me with 1, or if you subtract, you get 1. Minus 8 goes into 24 three times, and then x from x to the third cancels out 2 of them and leaves me with x to the second, or if you subtract, you get x to the second. Again, this is my answer when I factor out the greatest common factor. To check, you can always multiply across the parentheses to see if you get what you started with, so it's always a good way to do a check step. Number 3. Okay, if you do number 3, the first question again, what goes into 5 that goes into 10? Answer is 5. What's the greatest number of a's that I can pull out? I can pull out a to the second. What's the greatest number of b's I can pull out? I can pull out b to the fourth. So the greatest number of a's and the greatest number of b's that I can pull out. So again, I'm going to divide the bigs, subtract the little. So 5 goes into 5 divided one time. A to the second from a to the second is no a's. B to the fourth from b to the fifth is b to the first. Plus, the sign usually stays the same. 5 goes into 10 two times. A to the second from a to the fifth, you factor out 2 a's and subtract, you get a to the third left. And then b to the fourth, from b to the fourth, there are no b's left. This is my greatest common factor with my parentheses. If I multiply this times the first and this times the second, sure enough, I would get my first term and my second term. All I have to do is just multiply and add the exponents back. Okay, 10 and 20. Greatest common denominator, or greatest common factor would be 10. There's also got a's and they have y's. Okay, they got 2 here and 3 here. The greatest number they both have is only 2. They both don't have 3. And they have only one y. Okay, if you have 2 expressions here, you're going to have 2 expressions in your parentheses, and the subtraction sign will stay in the middle. Okay, again, we're going to do ds. Divide the bigs, subtract the littles. Divide the bigs, subtract the littles. So it's like I'm dividing 10 goes into 10 one time. A to the second from A to the second is just no A's. Y from Y is no Y's. Don't forget you got to keep the 1 there. 10 does go into 10 one time. 10 goes into 20 two times. A to the second from A to the third is 1A left. Y from Y to the fourth, if you subtract, you get Y to the third. This would be my final answer, factoring out the greatest common factor. Now we have 2 for you to try. So if you want to pause the video, you could work them out on your paper because you have a copy, and then you could come back and check your answers. This would be the 2 answers. The only thing in common here was an X. So if you take out the X, there was no number to take out, so the 5 stayed there. Do you remember your 1 in the end? A lot of students want to forget the 1. You have to make sure that if you have 1, 2, 3 expressions, that you have 1, 2, 3 expressions in parentheses, so that if you multiplied back, you would have your 5x, so you can't leave out the 1. Okay, that is factoring out the greatest common factor. Okay, now we're going to move on to factoring trinomials. These steps that are right here are very, very, very important. They will not change from the next 2 or 3 lessons that we do. I'm going to factor the first term. I'm going to factor the second term, last term. And then to do the check step, it's very, very, very important that we do the check step. In the first couple of lessons, the check step will be really something you can do mentally. But when we get to the last lesson under factoring, you will want to actually physically do the inners and outers so that you can check the middle term. All right, to example number 1. Okay, I noticed that I did not actually type this statement right here on your note sheet. It was kind of something I added after I had done the notes. So I will pause right now. If you would like to write this down, you can just hit the pause button on the video. But when the last term is positive, the signs must be the same, because if you remember, we're going to be multiplying 2 numbers to get positive 6. We can only multiply a positive times a positive, or we can multiply a negative times a negative and end up with a positive 6. Something else, and you will mentally add to get the middle term. You will mentally add to get the middle term. So that's where a lot of students can sometimes do these in their head. Think about everything that factors the first term. Well, there's only one way, it's x and x. Everybody gets really comfortable with x and x. What multiplies to give me 6 could be 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. Now, since I'm mentally adding, I want to add to get a positive 5. Well, adding 1 and 6 doesn't give me 5. Adding 2 and 3 does give me 5. And it has to add to be a positive 5. So it's going to take a positive 2 and a positive 3. Now, this is the mental check step. Inners would be 3 times x, or positive 3x. Outers would be positive 2 times x, which is positive 2x. When you combine those, sure enough, you get positive 5x, and that checks my middle term. The check step is very, very important to make sure that you're getting the middle term. Okay, notice the example 2. I also have the last term is positive. So I know I'm looking at plus plus or minus minus. I have to add to get positive 8. So I'm going to factor the first, and I'm going to factor the last. Then I'm going to mentally add to get the middle term. All right. X squares, x and x. Like I said, everybody gets real comfortable with that. The factors of 8 are 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. It's always important to consider all the factors, then decide which ones are going to add to give me 9. This time it would be 1 and 8. So I'm going to put a 1 and an 8. But this time when I do that mental check step, they have to mentally add to be negative 9. So that's going to give me 8x, and that's going to give me 1x. I need that to be a negative 8, and I need that to be a negative 1 so that it adds to be negative 9. So I'm going to need a negative sign here and here, so it's minus minus this time. This is my final answer. This stuff down here, this mental stuff, sometimes people call it the smile. I like to see students do the smile because that means that they're thinking about doing the check step, but some students will do that in their head. All right. Example 3. Another occasion when if you want to pause the video and write this on your notes, when the last term is negative, the signs must be opposite. So that means that they got to be plus, minus, or they can be minus and plus. But the signs have to be different. And you will mentally subtract to get the middle term. You'll mentally subtract to get the middle term. So notice in example 3, this time my last term is -8. So I'm going to mentally have to subtract to figure out how to get the middle term of 2. All right, I'm going to start with 2 sets of parentheses. Factor the first, that's x and x. Factor the last, that's 1 times 8 or 2 times 4. Now I have to remember that it's a -8, so it could either be -1 and +8, or it could actually be 1 times 8. It could even be +1 and -8. You could switch the signs. So just making sure that you are aware of all the possibilities, so negative, positive, and negative. So I have to consider the fact that I could have these plus or minuses. The signs are definitely opposite, and I'm mentally subtracting. So which ones would I mentally subtract to give me 2? Well, it's not 8 and 1. It's going to have to be 4 and 2. So I'm going to fill in a 4 and a 2. This time I need my middle term to be positive. So that's going to give me 4x if I do the inners. It's going to give me 2x if I do the outers. The bigger number needs to match the sign of the middle term. So I need that to be a +4 and a -2. So it tells me +4 minus 2. Usually the sign of the middle term tells you the sign of the bigger factor. All right, this one's also a -15. So when the last term is negative, the signs are going to be opposite, and I'm going to mentally subtract. So 2 sets of parentheses, factor the first, x and x. Factor the last, that's 1 times 15, or that's 3 times 5. Those are the only combinations of numbers that multiply to give 15. Now, because I know that I need a couple of factors that's going to mentally subtract to give me -14, I'm going to have to pick 1 times 15, so 1 and 15. This time I know that I have a -14. It's a -14. So when I do my mental check step, that's 15x, and that is +1x. I need my 15 to be a negative. So I'm going to put the negative with the bigger number, and the 1 is going to be my plus. Okay, and that would work to give me my mental, my thing. All right, if you want to pause the video and give you a chance to try these next ones on your own, pause the video now. All right, these are the answers to 5, 6, 7, and 8. The factors of 12 are 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 2 and 6. Because the last term's positive, I'm going to add to get the middle term, so I need a -6 and a -2, and that's going to give me -8. Okay, mentally do the check step. Here I need factors that would subtract to give me 1, -1. So because the last term's negative, I'm going to mentally subtract. So 3x, outers would give me -4x, and that's going to give me -1x, which is what I needed. Factors of 12 are the same ones. This time, because the last term is negative, I'm going to subtract to get 11. So the 2 factors I need are 12 and 1, and my bigger number, 12, needs to match the sign of the middle term. So I need a positive with the 12 and a subtraction with the 1. All right.